Hi, Astika.
Hello. Hi.
Hi. I hope you could hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me well?
Yeah. Yes, yes. Yeah.
All right. So,
Yeah. So we would wait for a few more time. I'm not sure like how
yeah,
to
we
go with it.
I'll just wait for 2 more minutes.
Okay, sure. Not an issue.
Okay. All right. So, greetings from COVID-19 Helpline India. We are proud to announce our ninth speaker for our Instagram live series, Mr. Vipin Vijay Nair. Mr. Vipin Vijay Nair is a lecturer on an in-service doctoral scholar at Jindal University of Behavioral Sciences, OP Jindal University, and has a master's in criminology. The upcoming session will focus on evolving and changing roles of NGOs and research post COVID-19, how the pandemic has induced organizations to rethink their business model, to diversify their revenue and build new alliances. So now Mr. Vipin Vijay and I will take. Uh,
Yeah. Thank you, Yashika, and thank you, COVID-19 India Helpline team. First of all, I have been following the lives which have been conducted in this particular Instagram page. It is very enlightening. And today, based on my experiences, based on my on-ground experience in NGOs and also on research platform, I would like to share certain highlights which have been very key in pre-COVID and also now post-COVID, whenever that would be. So it would be a really experiential sharing talk that I would want to present. First of all, we know that we are in a crisis situation, and when we look into crisis, it is basically a mix of intuition and blind spots. So we all, I won't say we all, but major scientists and everybody knew that there is a COVID-19 or coronavirus which would come pretty soon. They had that intuition, but the loophole was, or I would say the blind spot was when it will come. So it was predicted that it will come pretty later on, but then based on a number of glitches that happened, maybe through the market and everywhere, it came a little early. So thinking about this particular blind spot and where we are right now, we have to see what as an individual, what as an organization we can put forward. So the basic agenda, or I will say the basic purpose of me speaking about NGOs and about the research post or research vacancy or research opportunity would be to state that it's not the end. Even though we are in lockdown or partial lockdown, whichever it is, but there is a need to think beyond that. First of all, I would like to talk about multilateralism. Why to talk about multilateralism is that we are in a global village where each and every country is very essential, and they are required to join hands together. And in an international platform or international dais, we have to work together. So when you talk about WHO, when you talk about United Nations, these are multilateral organizations. And the first, I will say, the organization which came forward, even though they did say that it's not a pandemic at first and later on did declare it as a pandemic, but we cannot leave out the role of United Nations. So I would just want to state few of the opportunities or few of the platforms which were being put forward by United Nations. First of all, the head of the NGO liaison unit in United Nations, they came out with four major objectives during this pandemic and even before this. They came out that this is very important that each and every NGO which are on ground and working in any country may it be, they have to talk about one, the geopolitical tension, the geopolitical crisis. I think all of you would be aware of the India-China border crisis which has happened. So it's not something which is new. It is also a part where different NGOs who are working in international relationship can work. Then climate change or climate crisis. Then when we talk about global mistrust can also be based on human rights too. And when we talk about human rights, we cannot leave out the role of the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights. This was a key initiative based on NGOs who came together on an international platform, said that we need an international platform, we need an international organization which can work together and can curtail any amount of abuse, any amount of violence which is happening in any country. The Rohingya crisis, the UNHCR did play a major role. They played out and they stated, no, this cannot happen, and then number of initiatives were taken. Similarly, in March, this year, March 25th, United Nations built on a fund, which was a 2 billion fund, which was named as Global Humanitarian Response Fund. This fund was initiated for any country who require lab equipments, which require any kind of hand wash or sanitizing facilities. They also put their infrastructure over public awareness. A number of campaigns were held by United Nations stating that what exactly coronavirus is, how it can be spread or how it cannot be spread. And then lastly, they has focused on supplies. PPE kit was a major, I will say, drawback when the coronavirus first entered in any country. They were in shortage. They were asking from different countries. Even medicine supply was something which was being asked. So this fund was made on this particular ground. So moving from the international platform, when I move on to India specifically, because we all would be aware of the international premise which has happened, and it is a global pandemic. So we also have to talk about what was the effect in India. In India, before the COVID-19 happened and the NGO played their role, it is important for us to understand what did NGO or non-governmental organization had their role in the national territory. After the current ruling government came into picture in 2015, they were the first one, because it could be said that because of a lack of trust, because of lack of compliances by a number of NGOs, because of the governance facility which was there in NGOs, they were the first to change the FERA guidelines, the foreign exchange regulation. They were the first to change that they can get foreign funding. There were a lot of regulations which need to be followed. And with this, there were 20,000. So this is a bare minimum number which I'm stating. There were 20,000 NGOs which were deregistered. They couldn't get foreign funding. They were lacking foreign funding, which was, I will say, the major, I will say the revenue for these NGOs. In 2016, with respect to the investigation done by CBI and under the Ministry of Commerce and also other ministries, it was instituted that there was 3.1 million registered NGOs. So it was during 2016. But when we moved on by 2018, now we have 3.4 million registered NGOs. So one cannot neglect the role of 3.4 million NGOs who are working on ground. And COVID-19 came forward suggesting that yes, we require these NGOs for sure. Because if you will see, before COVID-19, there were one FERA guidelines which was there, and then there was also one more regulation which hasn't yet came into picture, which was the re-registration after every 5 years. Every NGO has to re-register to get the tax exemption, which will come by July 2020. The exemption will get implemented by July 2020. So these were few of the obstacles which were coming towards NGOs who are working on ground. And when the COVID-19 struck to our nation, and every individual, may it be migrant labor, may it be standard migrants, or may it be any underprivileged people who didn't had basic amenities and supply to live, it was NGOs who were helping government, state government or central government for distribution of these supplies. So this was the key role that NGOs played during our COVID-19 pandemic. And even, I will say, the government of India, after when they recognized that these NGOs were playing crucial roles, the Ministry of Home Affairs and the Ministry of Commerce and Social Justice all together, they had a press conference with close to around, I would say, 2,000 to 3,000 NGOs through video conferencing a number of days. And the ministry wrote to 90,000 NGOs that please assist your state government and your district level authorities, how you can contribute to them. Maybe you can be the bridge or the linking network between two different authorities, maybe state or center, and then maybe village or district. So I would say NGOs played a crucial role when this pandemic has happened. Even today, there were NGOs who were basically surviving through government fund. They were surviving with charity. When the lockdown happened, I specifically got calls from a number of NGOs. There were NGOs whom I was closely working with. There were victims of commercial sexual exploitation. There were NGOs who were working with migrant laborers. There were NGOs who were working with sanitation workers. And before lockdown, their I would say survival or their operation was based on either donation, charity, which was coming in every month, or they were funded by government, which was getting lapsed by 1 year or 2 years, and there was delay in the finances. As soon as a lockdown came into picture, they were deprived of all the finances which was there. But then there were NGOs who were owned by private players, who were funded by private players or companies. They pitched in and they did play a major role. So what I would say to government based on the entire premise which has been set up through COVID-19 is that we need to reprioritize ourselves in the spending towards social justice. And NGOs are a key player when we look into the contribution that they can play in research-based advocacy and also in the basic supplies that they can provide. If we let out the Indian paradigm, if you see international organization or international country, there are government-owned NGOs. So even though there are certain kind of, I will say, lacuna when we look into government-owned NGOs, because then we have to prioritize their ideology, we have to prioritize their cause or their objective rather than the social cause which is there. But then there would be, I will say, a sense of trust which would be built in these NGOs and also in the people whom they would be catering, that we need to work better, we need to sustain better in order to contribute towards the society. So that is one I will say that the government need to reprioritize, because this pandemic has shown how much this NGO sector or the civil society is capable of. They have come forward, and I think in news or news channels also they have projected how different NGOs are distributing I would say food supplies and basic amenities to different villages, different stranded laborers who are just walking on street or on highways. So that is one I will suggest one need to cater into. And the second thing that I will suggest is an environment of trust and respect. This is something which NGO sector has lacked over time. There was always a suspicion which was created towards the NGO sector that there would be certain kind of financial mistrust, there would be certain scams which would be going on. I would not deny that from the entire lot, there would be 0.5% or 0.7, maybe 1% NGOs who might be flouting with the funds or flouting with the amount that they are getting. But then there are 99% or even more than that who are working for the cause. And the NGOs that I have come across, they are working for close to around 10 to 15 years now. And now they are feeling that the funds that they used to get, maybe foreign funding or CSR, that is also being taken back. Because now if you see, the CSR is now being put forward to government-owned NGOs or government-owned schemes. Even the PM CARES, which was started, it also put forward the CSR fund can be diverted towards the PM CARE fund. So this is something where I will say the government should focus more on NGOs and give them such kind of leverage where CSR could be diverted to them, they can be invested to them, or charity could be made towards NGOs. So that is one point and one part of the talk that I would want to provide. And as I did talk about the research-based advocacy, being a research scholar myself, I would want to highlight, and I would be happy to hear questions and to hear some certain suggestions from other participants and audience too, who are interested in research, who are interested or looking forward in a research domain. So before COVID-19 did play a role, scholars, research scholars or researchers, they were following an ethical ground, an ethical background, which had that these were the guidelines which needs to follow if you are interacting with individuals, if you are interacting with people on ground, if they are underprivileged, if they are critical population, there are a few guidelines which is there. But with COVID-19 playing a role, the first thing is there is a wider scope now for research, not just from the prior fields which were there, but now there is a major opportunity which has come into play to look into the mental health of individuals who are standard laborers, migrant workers, critical population or underprivileged population, and how they are coping. Because even after, let's say, we have a vaccination, there would be at least 6 months that will take to revive our economy. That's the minimum amount I'm suggesting, which will take to revive our entire economy back. And when we would be able to revive the entire economy, then only there will be a scope that we would be able to provide basic amenities in a proper way, giving employment, giving productivity to laborers or migrants or any worker, or even the middle class or lower middle class, whoever it is. So everybody would take a time to come back to normalcy and revive the economy. So with this, it provides one opportunity to see what all can be the research paradigms which can be looked upon, other than what was there before the COVID-19. Second, I will say when we talk about qualitative and quantitative research approaches, when we look into quantitative research approach, it can be, I will say, changed, or an alternative approach could be looked upon on online surveys and online samples to be collected. But when we look into qualitative research, which looks into interacting with people, there can be one alternative where people could say that we can do a video conference or we can do a telephonic interview, certain kind of other qualitative aspect also. But when we look into ethnography, which is going on ground and doing a field research, when we look into participatory action research, where we are interacting and being in that particular society or in that particular area of research or area of specialization, then we have to be extra careful. Then we have to be very more cautious about what all could be the dilemma which could be faced by the sample or the participant or the population that we are going for research. One thing is, rather than not just the ethical approach that we used to follow, now we also have to look into the medical concerns. Even though, and I think a lot of you would be aware of, it's not just the symptomatic patient, there could be asymptomatic patients too, who, not patients, but asymptomatic individuals who are not reflecting symptoms. So there might be a possibility that they themselves don't know if they have COVID-19 or if they have that virus. So, and when they move forward in a society which per se lacks those kind of amenity, lacks those kinds of hygiene, and you are going there interacting with them, and especially I'm talking about the field work, I'm talking about ethnography and participatory action research, where you interact with a large group. That is one thing which I believe would be coming into picture, and the research have to get even medical clearance and medical certificate before they are applying for any kind of clearance for their research, and they also have to reflect it to the NGO if they are working with them, or even the society people or the population that they would be working in. Second of all, even the organization or the university I'm working with, Jindal Institute of Behavioral Sciences, there is a Center for Criminology and Forensic Studies, and I'm happy to associate as an assistant director there. We have been very diligently working with individuals who are of critical population. As soon as the pandemic hit, we knew that criminal justice system were taking initiative as such, like there were online courts which were going on, online hearing which was going on. The police population were given kits, and even though it was not, I will say, surplus enough to prevent each and every, and we have seen more than 1,000 policemen being affected by coronavirus, but there was one population who were neglected. It was later being taken care, even after when we did put out an appeal, we did put out a safeguard appeal to Ministry of Home Affairs, which was prison population. So we have been starting to do research, we have been starting to formulate policy wherein we could suggest ministries, suggest state prison department and other prison officials that these are also individuals who have to be protected by this virus. Even though they may be in close boundaries or isolation wards which are there and they are away from the society, but that is also a place where a coronavirus can get infected and they can hamper or they would be contagious to each and every person who's there. And the news was out there, was close to around 500 plus prisoners who were affected across India. And we have started working on research over helping them on the mental health parameters. So similarly, I will suggest there are n number of fields which one can look forward and one can take forward the research. And when you are taking forward the research, there are two major concerns I would suggest that do be kind and cautious that even though you're not aware of the physical condition or biological condition of yourself, it is better to take precaution by taking medical test and then having the certificate forward, and that would be a medical clearance that one can look forward. And second of all, I will say be a little more cautious when we are working over COVID-19 research parameters because I have seen a number of research when we look into depression, stress, anxiety. One needs to put forward all the information sheet which will suggest the voluntary participation, the option of refusal or withdrawal from the entire survey or entire research, because these are few research areas which can trigger or which can invoke any kind of stressors in an individual. So that is also key when we're looking into research. Other than this, I would be happy to suggest that the research areas has diversified. We have broader area to focus on and to provide our research onto that ground. So that is a key which I will suggest over how the NGOs would be taking a altogether different role. And I would hope that government would be eliminating certain kind of provisions and policies that they have come across, and they would try to withdraw, especially that registration rule, which was every 5 years they have to register, because this would build upon the trust and certain kind of compassion and respect between the central government or the authority and the NGO. And second of all, when we talk about research, again, the boundaries have again widened up. We have to think further when we look into research and research field. So these are the takeaways that I will suggest over to the two topics that I was catering to.
Thank you so much, Vipin. Now maybe there is a question.
Yeah, I would be happy to take a question for sure.
Had you had mentioned how there's this particular environment around an aura of trust and respect that the NGOs currently are not demanding. Like people don't really trust the NGOs. So what do you think? How could that be overcome? How could the NGOs?
Yes. So when we talk about trust even when we talk about trust between the NGOs and the society and NGOs and the government, so it's not just one way which we can put forward. So that as I mentioned in my talk also, that there can be a number of NGOs who are flouting rules, but the government also have to see that what exactly is the proposition between NGOs who are flouting rules and NGOs who are actually working. So this would be one where the NGO also has to submit financial documents. They have to agree on to the rules and regulations which has been put forward by the government, and they have to be more transparent onto it. And if all those can be put forward in the website, even the society can also see that what are the different initiatives that they have taken, what are the different kind of objectives that they are fulfilling, what are their takeaways towards the society, what are their giveaways to the society. And everything, if it is transparent enough, I will think that it will build a two-way trust or two-way respect street between the NGO and the society, and also between the NGOs and the government. And even the public also have to instill, because a lot of time we have downgraded the role of NGOs. We feel that working with NGOs is something which is low profile. Why to work with NGOs when we can work with multinational companies? So this image has to change, because the kind of work profile or job profile that one can see while working with an NGO is altogether different. I want to share my personal experience. After my graduation, I spent myself, and during my graduation also, I spent close to around 2, and after my graduation, I spent 1 more year working with a youth-based NGO. And that completely changed my horizon to look into the society, how we can contribute to the society. And maybe that was one of the reasons how I have diversified towards the job profile or the profession that I am in. So I would always suggest that students who are in graduation, they should at least spend 6 months or 1 year with any NGOs. I won't say go for like high brand NGOs or NGOs which have a greater brand value, but join any NGO, contribute minimum 1 hour or 2 hours every week, and see the change that you will see in your personalities, and see the change that you will see how you perceive a society and how you view a society. So that is one, I will say, a way where society can contribute. And then again, charity and donation is for sure a way how we can show support. But rather than just a monetary, I will say, outlay that we've put forward, I will say contributing by themselves is a key which one needs to look forward.
All right. There is another question where you had mentioned about uh, participants having the choice to withdraw when research is being done on more sensitive matters such as COVID or mental health issues. So, as a researcher, would one, how does one deal with, how does one ensure the comfort of the participant, and how does one deal with a participant having to withdraw, and how does that affect the quantitative outcome of the research?
Yes. So when we look into this information sheet where you talk about refusal to participate or opportunity to withdraw, this is very essential both on the online survey that we are working on and also the offline survey or questionnaire or scale, whichever we will be functioning on. So first of all, I would talk on both the lines because currently there is a trend where people are working for online surveys, online questionnaires, and online forms which are there. So the first thing which one needs to put forward is that this should be divided in sections. I've seen a number of forms where it goes on scrolling and everything is mentioned in one particular sheet. So even if the person would not agree on and put a checkbox to I agree to participate in the research, he can go forward and scroll down on questions. And this would again trigger certain kind of experiences which might be there. So I will say until unless the person ticks on the checkbox, reading all the propositions and all the clauses which are there in the information sheet, they should not be allowed or they should not be able to go to the next sheet or next section which is there. Second of all, how it can be taken forward is one, you have to, I would say, comprehensively mention what is the research objective. Are you, like as a researcher, are you getting a benefit out of it? Will the sample or the participant would get any benefit? Everything would be clear, and it should be, I will say, effectively mentioned that if in case any statement or anything which would be triggering or would be a stressor to you, you have the right to withdraw, and there would not be a follow-up over that, and you have that discretion which is there. Similarly, even when we are face-to-face, because there is, I will say, a loophole or I will say a blind spot when we are going on, going for an online survey or sample, that we are not interacting with the participant. So we would not know, like when they are reading it, is there any trigger which is happening. But contrary to when we are face to face, we can see through the non-verbal communication or through gestures or facial expression if the person is comfortable or not. So even without them saying that, we can take, I would say, a back step and say that if you don't want to answer it, I will withdraw this question or I will take it back, and you are not pressurized or there's no coercion to answer it. Second of all, I would suggest it for an offline survey or questionnaire that if you feel that the person is not comfortable in it, so a comfort or I will say a cooperation or I will say a friendly relation needs to be built between the respondent and the researcher. But if you feel by any chance, a lot of time it happens with critical population that a person of an opposite gender doesn't make them comfortable in terms of. So I can share with my personal experience when I was working with victims of commercial sexual exploitation. I will say all of them were female. So what I made sure that I will have a trusted aid with them. So which is a psychologist, which is a counselor, or which is, I will say, a coordinator of that particular NGO. So that was one which I made sure that I will take care of it. So I will also suggest for fellow researcher, if they are going for offline research, if you think that you don't have that capacity or there might be a chance that they might get triggered or they might feel certain kind of stressor, take somebody who's a trusted aid of the participant or the sample, and that would help you when they can intervene and say that no, let's stop it and we should not continue. So that's my personal experience too when I have done. And with respect to online survey, I've also shared the same.
Thank you so much. I don't think there are any more questions, but there is just, if you could briefly maybe elaborate a little more about, um, you had mentioned how the prison population was one section that was marginalized the most during this lockdown and during this pandemic. So, what have there been any measures that have been taken towards ensuring their safety or their health?
Yeah. So when we look into the criminal justice system, we have always seen that there has been major role from state authority or central authority to play onto the safeguard or any kind of measures needs to be taken. So first of all, when COVID did pitch in or COVID did hit India, I will say like from January itself, or I will say from Feb end, it started picking up. There were no critical measures which were taken, especially in the prison population. Police did take measures, court did take measures that they said that we would not be meeting, we should move on to online platform. The police population did take that they will be providing masks, not to all, but some of them who are actually on ground. But for prison population, I will say till the lockdown did pitch in. Not all prison or even like the sub jails or the jails where district jails, they were not taking action even till mid of April, wherein we had large number of cases. And the Arthur jail in Maharashtra was one of the first jail which came out with more than 100 prisoners and prison officials who were getting affected. Why it happened at first was that it was considered that being in an isolation position, they were not in touch with the society, they might not get affected. But later on, when these news came in, then ministry thought that we need to pitch in certain measures, and then Ministry of Home Affairs sent letters because prison is a state measure and it comes into state who needs to take action. So they only gave certain kind of safeguard or measures to look into it. So few of the measures which was later on taken, and we were also sending certain appeals to different state government and prison departments. We sent it to Delhi, Haryana, Karnataka, and I think there were a few more states where we did send out our appeal, wherein we said that there should be regular sanitization. There would be screening for each and every prison official and also people who are coming in. Regular checkup should be done for prisoners in order to see, because if they are symptomatic, they can be judged and they can be looked upon that, okay, this is a person who has the virus, we should isolate them. This was the first thing which was done when number of cases were coming into picture, that they were being taken into isolation wards and they were separated. But what if and what for those individuals who were contacts of that particular individual? Because if you'll see, as per the NHRC 2018 and NCRB report 2018, we are around 118% overcrowded as a prison population. So we are an overcrowded prison population, and when we are overcrowded, we can assume and we can think about the status of the cells and wards where these are kept. There's only one washroom, which is a toilet premise, which is there within a ward or within a cell. And all the prisoners have to use that. And even when we talk about the hygiene, which is there towards canteen and other facilities, all of them are using one particular canteen. So the measures which were suggested, the only thing which was done by ministry was they came out with an SOP, statement of purpose, that these are few things which needs to be done and these are things which you can do it. But there were very few things which came out in light, and there were few things which was being done, like teleconferencing. This was one thing which was a key which was done, and it was done later on. I'm not sure of if it is being done in every sub jail or district jail, but when we look into central jail, even if we talk about Kolkata, Rajasthan, Delhi, and some other states, even Karnataka, they have done the premise of teleconferencing with their contact person or family members, because we all know being in lockdown, and especially when you cannot meet your family members because the movement was restricted, the meeting rooms were locked down because they didn't want to allow anybody from outside. So one of the initiative which was being taken was teleconferencing or video conferencing, which was there. And the first thing which was suggested was to reduce the overcrowding. But then again, there were measures which was taken, but the ground reality was it didn't make a lot of change. Maybe from 118% of overcrowding, it has now moved down to 108 and 110, but still we are overcrowded. There was a report which was being put forward by prison department, but then again, it didn't make much of a change. So we are following it up. We are, even if when we are interacting with different state prison officials, if we see certain kind of laxity which is there, we are pitching forward as a civil society and academicians who can play their role in this research field.
All right. There is one last question from the audience, and after that, we will wrap this up. Prison seems like the last place where one would want to work. What motivates researchers like yourself to get involved in this?
See, first of all, if you ask about prison population, I believe there should be two different categorization of prisoners. I personally believe rather than prison as a terminology, it is better to use correction or correctional homes because there are individuals who have certain kind of mental issues or mental health or mental disorders which needs treatment. So rather than correction, those are individuals who would be treated based on their mental health issues or mental status which is there. But there are large population who can be corrected with different kind of recreational and vocational training. And if you will see, the major issue which the correction or the corrections feel is the reintegration. I completely agree that violence or any kind of physical abuse or physical assault, even sexual or any kind of violence which is prevailing and which these offenders do are not acceptable. That's why they are being punished and they are being sentenced. But there are certain, I will say, restorative measures which are being followed, wherein there is community services which is there. And I feel disappointed to say that in India we haven't been able to take advantage of restorative justice as a particular alternative justice which is there. A lot of other countries have been utilizing restorative justice as a very efficient alternative justice mechanism, wherein they do not have to report. I wouldn't say all, but mostly they don't have to report the offender or the culprit to the prison, where both the victim and offender can come together and resolve the matter at one or the other agreement or mutual agreement which could be put forward. So one, we need to see if they can be corrected. Second, if they are being corrected and they feel reformed, we should make an efficient effort to reintegrate back to the society. I have seen in number of cases where even the prison department have made certain kind of opportunity when we look into open prisons, semi-open prisons. These are ways where they're trying to reintegrate them back to society. And I will say one of the best example is in Jaipur, Sampurna Ananda Open Prison, where the prisoners, or I will say the person who is residing in open jail, they are allowed to go and work in the society, and in the evening they can come back. So this kind of trust, this kind of flexibility when it is given to prisoners, it instills the kind of respect that the society can give them. And even the prison officials believe in them that they would be coming back, and there hasn't been the recidivist practices when these kind of restorative measures or open jail measures have been there. I will say the error of any kind of grievance or mistake to happen of any prisoners who have been released to open prison, it is, I would say, negligible. Maybe 2% or 3% have been recidivists. So this is one of the ways, and I believe as a researcher that maybe there will be one time that we would have restorative justice as an alternative justice. So that is, I will say, one goal that I'm focusing on, and that motivates me to work with prison officials and prison department and prison structure or correctional as a whole.
Thank you so much, Vipin. It has been a pleasure to have you with us. And unfortunately, we've run out of time. So I'm going to wrap this session up. Thank you everyone for joining. And I hope you all join for the other IG live sessions and webinars as well.
Thank you very much everybody for joining. Take care.